Amina Caldwell lived a life that flowed as calmly as a river. She was highly successful at the public relations firm where she worked, and it seemed inevitable that she would rise to a major position in the coming years. Every morning, she arrived at work with a set routine, grabbing her coffee while quickly scanning emails and messages from her superiors before joining her team's daily meetings. Everything was in its place. From the outside, Amina's life seemed flawless. But inside, a quiet unrest was growing stronger each day. The source of this internal turmoil was the constant reminder of the racist and sexist microaggressions she faced. As a black woman, Amina had always had to work harder in society. It was no different at her workplace. In an environment where white men confidently voiced their opinions and moved with ease, Amina chose to remain in the background, preferring silence. More often than not, she felt she didn't have the opportunity to express herself, yet she couldn't find the courage to speak up. Her boss, John, usually accepted ideas from others with eagerness, but Amina's suggestions were either ignored or only taken seriously when echoed by someone else. Gradually, she began to question her place at work. This woman, yelled at on occasion, overlooked, and standing in meetings like a shadow, waited silently for one more chance. One morning, it was announced that Amina would attend a major company meeting. This meeting was to discuss one of the firm's most important projects and would include all top-level executives. Amina was eager to present an idea related to the project. For years, she had been overlooked, silent, playing the role of an observer, but now she wanted to be seen. This was her chance, perhaps the opportunity of a lifetime. Yet her heart was racing and her hands were sweaty. Even if her idea was accepted, would it just make her feel like someone else's echo again? Would she once more be belittled? When the meeting began, everyone quietly took their seats, including Amina. The expensive suits worn by the white men in the room sharply contrasted with Amina's black dress. She had prepared her notes carefully, but no matter how strong her proposal was, she wasn't sure how much attention it would receive. As a woman, as a black woman. During the meeting, a few managers and team leaders presented their ideas. When it was her turn, Amina took a deep breath and began to speak carefully, choosing her words precisely and pulling back with every sentence. And then her worst fear came true. A manager dismissed her suggestion, saying, "I don't think this is worth discussing further." A few people in the room smirked. Amina lowered her head and stepped back. Another white man then repeated her idea and was immediately praised. Amina tried to disappear into her thoughts, her face drawn, but there was a momentary blankness in her eyes, a sign of an internal reckoning transforming into a deep anger. She had spent her whole life stepping aside, feeling forced into silence. In that moment, it felt as though the voice within her, long suppressed, had turned into a ticking bomb. She realized the time had come to let that rage and pain be heard. At first, it was just a passing thought, but the accumulation of years of hurt told her that something had to change, and change required courage. After the meeting, instead of going home, Amina sat in a cafe. Her mind was clouded and exhausted, yet she felt something was about to burst. She opened her laptop and began typing an anonymous post on LinkedIn. The title was just one sentence: "It's time to break the silence." Amina wrote a bold piece exposing the racist and sexist attitudes at her company. She described how women, especially black women, were consistently ignored, how their ideas were brushed aside, and how this pattern eventually pushed her to the edge of losing her job. She shared the heavy burden of discrimination, pressure, and silence in the workplace. Then she hit post. That night, the post spread quickly across social media. People began to comment: women's rights advocates, supporters of workplace equality, and many others sent messages of support. By the early hours of the morning, Amina's LinkedIn post had been shared thousands of times. What began as a quiet act became a growing wave. By the next morning, Amina woke to the constant buzz of her phone. Among the flood of messages were notes of encouragement from strangers. But one message stood out. It was from Human Resources, urgently requesting a meeting. Whatever came next, that meeting would change her life again. Just hours before, she had been dismissed with a careless comment. But now that moment had ignited something far greater. With her post, Amina had sparked a movement. And now it wasn't just her voice being heard, but the voices of all those who had been silenced. Although Amina's LinkedIn post initially seemed like a routine workplace complaint to many, it unexpectedly ignited the spark of a social movement. At first, there were just a few comments and messages of support on social media platforms, but over time, people, especially women, began to share their own similar experiences. Amina's post became a vehicle for people from all walks of life to raise their voices. It unveiled the dark corners of her company and the industry it belonged to, exposing the long-silenced voices with a single post. Amina's courage inspired many women to confront the injustices they faced in their own workplaces. However, this journey was a lonely one for Amina at first. The system she challenged was powerful and quickly moved to silence her and erase her impact. The company promptly fired her. This decision didn't just target Amina. It was a message aimed at the thousands who shared her perspective. The company tried every method to discredit her post, but with each passing day, Amina's truth gained more recognition. What seemed like a solitary victory soon became something far greater, a commitment to a larger cause. Initially overwhelmed by confusion and isolation, Amina put aside her lost job and personal image and began to consider how to channel the support she received into a movement. One message from the flood of social media responses struck her deeply and gave her a sense of direction. "You're not alone. We were silent too, but now we're making noise." That message marked a turning point. Amina realized she wasn't alone. This wasn't just her fight, it was a shared struggle for many women around the world. Opting to remain anonymous in the digital space, Amina organized a Zoom meeting. The women who joined came from various professions, backgrounds, and ages, yet they all had one thing in common. They had been silenced, wronged, and had long carried unspoken anger. The outcome of that first meeting marked Amina's transition into leadership. It birthed the Silent Collective. The collective quickly evolved into a national movement. Women supported one another by sharing their stories, their silenced moments, and the injustices they had endured. Social media became a powerful tool that amplified their voices. Inspired by Amina's bravery, each woman began to speak out. With every shared story, they grew stronger. It wasn't just Amina's battle anymore. It was a stand against the shared injustices faced by thousands of women. In time, the Silent Collective reached broader audiences. Prominent activists, journalists, artists, and even social media influencers joined Amina's cause. This was a purely organic show of support. Amina had done more than highlight discrimination within her own company. She had drawn attention to the societal silence and the heavy toll it exacted. The collective began preparing for its first major action. Meetings, phone calls, and intense debates across WhatsApp groups escalated as women shaped their strategy. They knew that every step toward breaking the silence would matter. The first public act would make waves in the television world. One morning, Amina was invited to appear on a well-known morning show. As one of the guests, she would share her story and speak about her experiences with gender and racial discrimination. But Amina saw this as more than just an interview. It was a platform to reach many. And most importantly, she knew she was no longer alone. She now stood with a community behind her. When the show began, Amina felt stronger than she ever had before. Sitting at the large table in front of the cameras, surrounded by white men and a few women, she looked directly at them and began to speak. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had stayed silent. For years, I stayed quiet about the sexist and racist behavior I endured at work and in society. Today, I speak up. I always thought I was doing the right thing by staying silent, but I don't have to anymore. Every word she spoke carried weight and seemed to shift the atmosphere in the studio. But just then, a technical glitch occurred, and Amina's audio was cut off. The broadcaster began to slowly remove her image from the screen along with the sound. Viewers quickly noticed what was happening and took to social media with a rallying cry. "Amina's voice has been cut." Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms erupted as clips of the moment went viral. It was the start of something much bigger. The hashtag #WeHearYou began trending shortly after. Celebrities, activists, journalists, members of the press, and ordinary citizens all began to post messages supporting Amina in her fight. No one had anticipated the backlash that would come from trying to silence her. The attempt to mute her only amplified her voice and gave courage to countless other women who had lived in silence for too long. This moment marked the second major turning point in Amina's life. She was no longer just the anger of one silenced woman. She had become the voice of all who had been forced into silence. After Amina's television appearance and the abrupt cutting of her voice, the wave of public support that followed grew rapidly. The silent collective had transformed into a massive protest movement joined by women from all walks of life. The group, now a tightly connected and powerful network, wasn't just standing against gender and racial inequality anymore. It was fighting to expose discrimination in workplaces, schools, on the streets, and in every part of society. Amina now found herself at the forefront of a social movement, becoming a powerful symbol. One day during an interview on a national news program, Amina was confronted with the most ruthless question yet. The host asked whether she believed she was responsible for losing her job. Amina took a deep breath and without fear responded, "Yes, I lost my job, but what I truly lost wasn't just employment. It was my rights and my human dignity. The system tried to silence me, as it has done to thousands of women like me, and today I chose to speak up, not just with my voice, but with our voice." Her words cemented her place as more than just a women's rights advocate. She had become a national symbol of resistance against discrimination. But this victory came at a cost. Amina began receiving threats through social media. Former executives from her company announced legal action against her. She hadn't just lost her job, she was now facing serious threats to her safety. Yet Amina understood that these were simply the hardships that came with the path of resistance. The growing number of supporters around her gave her strength and protection. One evening, over dinner with a few key allies, Amina reminded everyone at the table why their struggle mattered. These were not just ordinary supporters. They were proven leaders across various fields, all fighting for social change. As Amina looked around, she didn't just see her own battle reflected in their eyes. She saw hope for an entire society. Soon after, the We Hear You campaign Amina had launched grew even more through a series of public town halls. Amina and her allies began organizing protest marches across the country. These weren't just in major cities, but in small towns as well. At each event, women and men came together to raise their voices for justice and equality. But one day, an unexpected event would once again shift Amina's life and the direction of the movement. As her voice continued to be heard on one of the country's biggest news networks, a major media smear campaign was launched against her. While preparing to speak at a large event, Amina was blocked by the event organizer. She had once again encountered resistance from the system, and she fought tirelessly to overcome it. The media began to portray Amina not just as an activist, but as a threat to social order. But Amina found new strength in the face of this defamation. Above all else, she knew the importance of their cause and the righteousness of their struggle. At a major press conference, Amina answered tough questions with unshakable courage. She called on the government to implement legal reforms that would prevent such discrimination and demanded greater transparency from corporations. However, she acknowledged that the current laws were not enough to protect women, especially Black women, from racial and gender-based injustice. That day, Amina realized that their fight could not rely solely on social media. To create meaningful change, they had to engage in legal battles as well. At that moment, Amina resolved to go beyond raising awareness. She would work toward true societal transformation. Amina and the We Hear You movement were not just a group of activists. They represented a broader social revolution. Women stood up for women. People who had suffered from racism and discrimination came together in solidarity. They were no longer simply defending themselves. They were fighting for rights in a world where their voices could finally be heard. Following all these events, Amina slowly became one of the architects of the societal change she had once only dreamed of. Along the way, she continued to be the voice of millions of women who had been ignored for too long. Companies, governments, and institutions began to take her seriously. Amina's name was now not just associated with women's rights, but with the broader fight for human rights. In the end, Amina had rediscovered her power and her purpose to keep the movement alive, not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced, and to help build a world where every voice could be heard.